To tell us more about what she's seen, the photographer Gabriela Maj joins me now from our bureau in New York. Gabriela, thanks so much for joining us. We're looking at your extraordinary pictures here in the studio. Just tell us a little bit more about these prisons that you went to and why these women were imprisoned.
Well, Yalda, I'll tell you, the prisons in Afghanistan that are housing incarcerated women are mostly prisons filled with women who have been incarcerated for, like you said, moral crimes. Moral crimes can apply to women who have been raped, who have run away from home, who have run away from forced marriages, or who have been accused of adultery. A lot of the women that make up the prison population are young, under 20 years old, and many of them are incarcerated with their children. Some come in pregnant and deliver their children while in prison, and others come in with young toddlers that they are raising because the children have been rejected by the families alongside their mothers for the perceived shame that the woman has brought to her community.
Tell me one of the stories that really struck you.
Well, I'll tell you one of the stories, there were so many, but the one that really stays with me was the first one. It was the first woman that I met in Barambagh. Barambagh is a prison on the outskirts of Kabul. That was the first one I visited. Her name in the book has been changed to Fareshte, and she was a young woman, about 17, 18 years old, who had been raped by a man in her village. And she became pregnant as a result. And what happened afterwards, there was a jurga, a council of elders that was called to decide her fate, and it was decided that she should be stoned to death. And her father came forward. He had a letter written to the police asking for her arrest. Fareshte was arrested, and she gave birth to her son in prison. And when I met her, she was awaiting not only sentencing from the courts for how long she would be in prison. The sentence for moral crimes is between 5 and 15 years. But she was also awaiting whether or not her assailant would agree to a marriage between her and him in order to provide legitimacy for her child and a place for her in her community. And this was something that I had never heard of before, and was a story that not only leveled me, but sort of stayed with me for the many weeks and months after that first visit to Afghanistan, and was very much an inspiration behind continuing this project.
I too have visited many female prisons in Afghanistan, and actually what I found was they are environments where these women can share each other's stories. They become very good friends. It's an environment where they feel quite safe, and while many of them aren't necessarily safe havens, some of them prefer to stay there than go back home.
Absolutely, absolutely. There were many women that I met who had turned themselves into the police, so they were not accosted or arrested. They went to the police on their own and very much wanted to stay in the prisons. One of the questions that I asked over and over again across the country was, what will you do when you are released? And the answer was oftentimes, I hope to be able to stay here for as long as possible. And a follow-up answer to that was, when I'm released, I'm afraid I will be killed. So the prison definitely has this kind of alternate space of safety for a lot of these women as well.
And it gives you, in many ways, an insight into still how difficult life is for so many women, that they prefer to be in a prison rather than go back to their communities.
Absolutely. I mean, the prison is an all-women environment, so there is a level of safety. There are female guards in many of these prisons, so the women do feel comfortable in a way that they do not in their communities. The problem is, of course, the lack of gender equality that so many Afghan women and women across the world experience on a daily basis. But in Afghanistan, to such an extent that the prison does offer in too many instances, a space of respite and safety.
The experience I had was they didn't feel comfortable talking on camera, but having their photographs taken, did they open up to you and their stories?
Well, I'll tell you, the way that I worked in the prisons, I was very much, my first priority were the stories. So I spent many hours, sitting on the floor with groups of women speaking. That was the first priority. The stories and the conversations were recorded. and then later transcribed. And then afterwards, I would ask permission to take photographs. Some of the women agreed, some of them would not. Some of them wanted to participate, wanted to have their photographs taken, but they wanted to have their faces covered so that they would be anonymous. So there was a variety of approaches to being photographed. But I'll tell you, there were some really...
Unfortunately, we have run out of time. We've got about 5 seconds left on program. But Gabriela, so wonderful to hear you talk about your book and the stories.